Commander Jake Morrison stood in the Grand Assembly Hall on Zentara Prime and felt the weight of billions of human lives pressing down on his shoulders. The chamber stretched upward for hundreds of feet with walls made of crystalline material that reflected light in ways that hurt human eyes. Around him sat the representatives of 12 alien species, each more ancient than humanity could imagine, and each one looking at him with something between pity and contempt. Admiral Claire Bennett stood to his right, her uniform crisp and her face carved from stone. Captain Derek Hayes was on his left, younger and less able to hide the anger burning in his chest. They had been summoned here for what the council called an emergency session, but everyone knew what this really was. This was a trial, and humanity had already been found guilty. The Zentari ambassador, a being named Velthor, who towered 12 feet tall and looked like living crystal, rose from his seat. His voice echoed through the chamber like wind chimes in a storm. He spoke of humanity's aggression, of their rapid expansion across the stars, of their refusal to abandon what he called primitive concepts of freedom and independence. He spoke of how humans had colonized 47 worlds in just 2 centuries, while the Council had carefully managed expansion for millennia. He spoke of the human military, which had grown to rival the combined forces of 3 Council members. Jake listened and wanted to scream. Everything Velthor said was technically true, but missed the point entirely. Humans expanded quickly because they worked hard and dreamed big. Their military was strong because they remembered the lessons of history, lessons written in blood on Earth. Their concepts of freedom weren't primitive but hard-won through centuries of struggle. When Velthor finished, Claire was given a chance to respond. She stepped forward and her voice carried clearly through the vast space. She reminded the Council of the Balerian incident, when human ships had rushed to defend a Council world from pirates while the official defense forces were still mobilizing. She spoke of human scientists who had shared their medical advances freely, saving millions of alien lives from plague. She talked about the trade agreements that had enriched both humans and dozens of Council species. The Council listened politely, and Jake could see in their ancient eyes that none of it mattered. They had made their decision before this session began. This was just theater, a show of proper procedure before they did what they had already agreed to do. The vote was called. The Zentari voted for banishment. The Corellians, who looked like floating jellyfish, voted for banishment. The Thragans with their multiple heads voted for banishment. One by one, the species declared their judgment. Only 3 voted against it. The Balerians, who remembered being saved, the Torvin, who valued honor above politics, and the small Pixith, who traded extensively with human merchants. 9-3. Humanity was banished from Council space. The terms were harsh and designed to hurt. All human colonies beyond the Sol system had to be abandoned within 6 months. Every human ship had to retreat to Earth's solar system and stay there. Any human vessel found outside Sol space after the deadline would be destroyed without warning. The human embassy on Zentara Prime would close. All trade agreements were void. Humanity was being erased from the galactic community as if they had never existed. Claire Bennett stepped forward one last time. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a blade. She looked at each council member in turn and said that they were making a mistake. She said humanity had fought beside them and bled for them. She said that when darkness came, and it always does, they would remember this day and regret it. Velthor actually laughed, a sound like breaking glass. He said the Galactic Defense Force was more than capable of protecting the Council without unstable humans. Other Council members nodded and smiled. They saw Claire's words as melodrama, the tantrum of a child being disciplined. Jake wanted to say something, wanted to make them understand, but Claire touched his arm and shook her head. There was nothing left to say. They had lost before they arrived. The 3 humans left the chamber and walked through corridors filled with alien beings who stepped aside and whispered as they passed. Some looked sympathetic. Most looked relieved. Humanity had made them nervous with their passion and energy and growth. Now they could go back to their slow, comfortable existence without the humans shaking things up. The journey back to human space took 3 weeks. During that time, Claire sent orders to every human colony and military installation. The evacuation would begin immediately. There would be no arguments, no delays, no exceptions. They had 6 months, and she intended to have every human safely home in 5. Captain Derek Hayes was assigned to oversee the evacuation of New Terra, humanity's crown jewel colony. It had been settled for 80 years and was home to 4 million people. They had built cities and farms, universities and spaceports. Children had been born there who had never seen Earth, and now they had to leave it all behind. Derek stood on the landing pad of New Terra's capital city and watched families line up to board transport ships. Parents carried crying children. Old people took one last look at homes they had built with their own hands. Teenagers argued with their parents, not understanding why they had to leave. Some people loaded belongings onto the ships. Others left everything behind, too heartbroken to care about possessions. The colony ships formed a convoy that stretched for thousands of miles. Hundreds of vessels carrying millions of people, all heading back to a solar system that would suddenly be very crowded. The human military fleet surrounded the convoy, warships bristling with weapons that they were forbidden to use. They were shepherds now, not warriors, guarding their people on this retreat that felt like defeat. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the procession through the view screen. He had been a soldier for 30 years and had seen war and death and loss. But this felt worse somehow. This felt like the end of something important. Humanity had reached for the stars and been slapped down. They had tried to join the galactic community and been told they weren't good enough, weren't civilized enough, weren't worthy. The convoy crossed back into Sol space 4 months and 23 days after the Council's vote. Not a single human life was lost during the evacuation, which was some small victory in this ocean of defeat. The military fleet took up defensive positions around Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies. They would stay there, watching the borders, waiting for an attack that might never come. On Earth, President Linda Foster addressed the planet. She spoke of resilience and determination. She said humanity had survived ice ages and plagues and wars. They would survive this too. They would remain free, remain independent, remain human. The Council could have the galaxy. Humans would have their pride. But as Jake Morrison settled into his quarters that first night back home, he couldn't shake Claire's words to the Council. When darkness came, they would regret this. He stared out at the stars and wondered what form that darkness would take, and whether the Council would realize their mistake before it was too late. 15 years passed in silence, and humanity changed in ways the Galactic Council could never have predicted. The banishment that was meant to humble them became a crucible that forged them into something stronger. Without access to Council technology or trade, humans were forced to innovate on their own, and what they created was remarkable. Dr. Lisa Chen worked in a laboratory deep beneath the surface of Mars. She was 42 years old and had dedicated the last decade to solving a problem that Council scientists considered impossible. The quantum slip drive existed in theory, but the power requirements and dimensional mathematics were beyond anyone's ability to actually build one. At least that was what everyone thought until Lisa proved them wrong. The breakthrough came at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. Lisa had been running simulations for 18 hours straight when the numbers finally aligned. The quantum slip drive didn't need massive power if you approached the dimensional fold from a different angle. It was so simple that she laughed when she saw it, then cried because she knew what this meant. Human ships could now move twice as fast as anything in Council space. Peter Walsh was an engineer who had lost his home on New Terra during the evacuation. He had spent 15 years angry about that loss, and he channeled that anger into work. The graviton shield was his masterpiece. Council shields worked by absorbing energy, which meant enough firepower could overwhelm them. Peter's shields deflected energy by bending gravitational fields around the ship. The result was a defensive system that got stronger the more you shot at it. The first test was conducted on a small frigate near Jupiter. Peter watched from the command center as they fired increasingly powerful weapons at the ship. The shields held against everything they threw at it, even a sustained barrage that should have vaporized the vessel. When the test ended, Peter allowed himself a small smile. The Council had made humanity an enemy. Now that enemy had become very difficult to kill. Fleet Admiral Jake Morrison oversaw the construction of the new warships. He was older now, his hair gray at the temples, but his eyes were still sharp. The flagship Unity was launched 3 years after Lisa's breakthrough. It was smaller than Council dreadnoughts, but faster, more maneuverable, and packed weapons that would have been considered impossible by galactic standards. The plasma lance was Karen Wright's design, a focused beam weapon that could cut through shields and armor like they weren't even there. The fleet grew slowly, but steadily. Humanity didn't have the resources for thousands of ships, but they didn't need thousands. Every vessel they built was worth 10 of anything the Council had. Quality over quantity had become the human way. Lieutenant Brandon Cole served aboard the patrol ship Defiant. He was 26 years old and had never known anything but isolation. He had been born the year humanity was banished, and had grown up on stories of the betrayal. To him, the Council wasn't a political organization, but an enemy that had wronged his people. His generation didn't want reconciliation. They wanted respect, earned at gunpoint if necessary. Brandon's job was boring most days. The Defiant patrolled the boundary of Sol space, monitoring for any Council ships that might stray too close. In 15 years, there had been exactly 0 incursions. The Council had meant it when they said they wanted nothing to do with humanity. The galaxy had moved on and forgotten about Earth. On Mars, Senator Paul Hendricks led a small but vocal political faction that wanted to seek peace with the Council. He argued in assembly halls and on news broadcasts that isolation was hurting humanity. Trade would bring prosperity. Cultural exchange would bring knowledge. Pride was fine, but it didn't feed families or advance civilization. President Linda Foster listened to Paul's arguments and rejected them every time. She had been there in that chamber on Zentara Prime. She had seen the contempt in those alien eyes. Humanity would not go crawling back to beg for acceptance. They would stand alone with their heads held high. And if the Council ever wanted to talk, they could come to Earth and apologize first. The younger generation supported Linda completely. Kids who had grown up during isolation didn't remember the time when humans and aliens worked together. They only knew that their parents had been forced to abandon their homes, that their grandparents had been humiliated and cast out. To them, the Council wasn't something to rejoin, but something to oppose. Officer Nicole Grant was one of those young officers. She graduated top of her class from the Naval Academy on Luna, and was given command of the destroyer Phoenix at age 28, the youngest captain in the fleet. She had grown up hearing her grandfather's stories about evacuating New Terra. She had inherited his anger and his determination that humanity would never be weak again. Isolation had done something else too. Old divisions that had plagued humanity for centuries simply melted away. Nations still existed on paper, but they didn't mean much anymore. Everyone was just human now, united by shared exile. The flags of individual countries were still flown at ceremonies, but the flag that mattered was the blue and white banner of united humanity. They had been forced together by outside pressure and discovered they were stronger as one. Technology advanced in other areas too. Medical treatments that extended human lifespan by decades. Agricultural techniques that could grow food in the most hostile environments. Mining operations that could strip asteroids of valuable materials in weeks. Energy systems that could power entire cities from facilities the size of a house. Humanity poured everything into improving themselves because they had nothing else to focus on. Commander Helen Price ran the intelligence division from a station on Europa. Her job was to monitor what little information leaked out of Council space. Trade ships still came near the boundary sometimes, and their communications could be intercepted. News broadcasts could be picked up if you had sensitive enough receivers. Over 15 years, Helen built a picture of a galaxy that had become complacent. The Council had grown comfortable in humanity's absence. Their economy was stable. Their borders were secure. The Galactic Defense Force conducted exercises and patrols but hadn't fought a real war in over a century. They had everything they wanted: peace, prosperity, and order. The chaos that humans brought was gone, and they were happy about it. Helen watched all this and felt uneasy. History taught that comfortable civilizations were vulnerable civilizations. The Council had grown soft while humanity had been hardening itself. She filed reports that no one paid much attention to because there was no obvious threat. Everything looked fine, until it didn't. The first anomalies appeared on long-range sensors at the end of the 15th year. Helen was the first to notice them. Strange signals from deep space beyond the galactic rim. Energy signatures that didn't match any known technology. Ships moving in formations that suggested military discipline. She flagged it as potentially important and sent the data up the chain of command. Jake Morrison looked at the sensor data and felt ice in his stomach. He had been a soldier long enough to recognize the signs. Something was coming. Something big. He ordered the deep space monitoring stations to increase their watch and report anything unusual immediately. 2 weeks later, the first distress call arrived. It came from a council world called Therox, a mining colony with a population of 8 million. The transmission was broken and filled with static, but the message was clear enough. They were under attack, ships had appeared from nowhere, and were bombarding the planet. The Galactic Defense Force had been called but wouldn't arrive in time. "Help us," the message said. "Someone please help us." The transmission cut off suddenly. Helen tried to re-establish contact, but there was nothing. Therox had gone silent. Over the next 3 days, 16 more distress calls came in from different council worlds. All of them told the same story. Unknown attackers, overwhelming force, defense forces destroyed or scattered. The transmissions used one word to describe the enemy over and over: Scourge. Jake Morrison called an emergency meeting of the military command staff. Admiral Claire Bennett was there, older now, but still sharp. Captain Derek Hayes had been promoted to Commodore and commanded an entire battle group. Nicole Grant represented the younger generation of officers. They all looked at the star maps showing the systems that had gone dark. The question no one wanted to ask was obvious. What do we do? The Council had banished humanity. They had cast Earth aside and told them never to come back. Those same Council members were now dying, their worlds burning, their people crying for help. Did humanity owe them anything? Claire Bennett spoke first, and her words were cold. The Council made their choice 15 years ago. Let them live with the consequences. But Jake Morrison pulled up the video feeds from one of the dying worlds. The images showed cities in flames, families running through streets, children screaming. These weren't the Council members who voted for banishment. These were just people, civilians who had nothing to do with politics. They were dying, and Earth could hear their screams. The war room on Luna Station was completely silent as Admiral Jake Morrison played the intercepted transmissions for the assembled military and political leadership of United Humanity. The screams coming through the speakers were the same in any language. Terror and pain transcended the need for translation. President Linda Foster sat at the head of the table with her hands folded and her face unreadable. Senator Paul Hendricks looked pale. Admiral Claire Bennett watched the displays with cold calculation, while younger officers like Nicole Grant clenched their fists in helpless rage. Commander Helen Price stepped forward to brief them on what intelligence had gathered. The enemy called themselves the Scourge Collective. They came from beyond the galactic rim, from dark space that no one had ever explored because there was supposedly nothing out there. Apparently someone forgot to tell the Scourge that. The Scourge were a hive mind, Helen explained. Billions of individual creatures all connected to a central consciousness that directed them like cells in a body. They consumed everything in their path: biological matter, technology, resources, even the atmosphere of planets. They didn't want to conquer or subjugate. They wanted to devour. In 3 weeks, 4 council worlds had been completely consumed. Populations in the tens of millions just gone, leaving behind barren rocks stripped of everything that made them valuable. The Galactic Defense Force had finally engaged the Scourge at a place called Epsilon Sector. The battle lasted 4 hours. The Defense Force was completely destroyed. Jake watched footage of that battle captured by automated probes. The Council ships were built for peacekeeping, beautiful vessels with elegant lines designed as much for show as function. They had fought against pirates and smugglers, not a military force that wanted to exterminate them. The Scourge vessels looked organic, grown rather than built, and they moved with terrifying coordination. They adapted to Council tactics in real time, learning from each engagement and adjusting their approach. The Defense Force never had a chance. 6 more worlds had gone dark since Epsilon Sector. The Council was in full retreat, evacuating populations where they could and abandoning worlds they couldn't defend. The carefully maintained order of the galaxy was collapsing in a matter of weeks. At this rate, Helen estimated, the entire Council would fall within 6 months. After that, the Scourge would keep expanding. Eventually, they would reach Sol space. President Foster asked the question that everyone was thinking. Do we help them? The room erupted in argument. Senator Hendricks immediately said yes, that humanity had a moral obligation to help people in danger regardless of past politics. Several of the younger officers disagreed loudly, saying the Council made their bed and could lie in it. Claire Bennett pointed out the practical angle. Better to fight the Scourge now with whatever remained of Council forces than alone later. The debate raged for an hour until Jake Morrison stood up. The room fell quiet because when Jake spoke, people listened. He said he had been thinking about this question for 3 days and nights. He had thought about revenge and justice and all the ways the council deserved what was happening to them. But then he kept coming back to those transmissions, to the sounds of families dying, of children crying for parents who couldn't save them. Jake said he didn't give a damn about the council politicians who had voted for banishment. Most of them were probably already dead anyway. But there were billions of innocent people out there who had never wronged humanity, who were dying in the most horrible ways imaginable. If humans could stop that and chose not to, what did that make them? Were they really any better than the council that had cast them out? The room was silent when Jake finished. Nicole Grant was the first to speak up, and her voice was tight with emotion. She said her grandfather had died heartbroken after losing his home on New Terra because of the council's decision. She had every reason to hate them, but her grandfather had also taught her that being strong meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, even when they didn't deserve it, especially when they didn't deserve it. One by one, the officers voiced their support. Even the ones who wanted revenge admitted that letting billions die was not what humanity stood for. Senator Hendricks looked vindicated, but Jake noticed that Claire Bennett remained silent, her face troubled. President Foster called for a vote among the Leadership Council. The result was unanimous. Humanity would deploy the fleet to council space and engage the Scourge. They would do it not because the council deserved it, but because it was the right thing to do. As the meeting broke up and officers rushed to mobilize their forces, a priority transmission came through. Helen Price brought it directly to Jake and Linda Foster. The transmission was from Zentara Prime, from Ambassador Velthor himself. The image showed the massive crystalline being in what looked like a palace chamber. The walls behind him were cracked and burning. His body was damaged with pieces missing from his structure. Velthor looked directly at the camera and said 2 words in perfect English. "Help us." Then the transmission cut to static. They tried to re-establish contact, but there was nothing. Zentara Prime, the capital of the Galactic Council, was under attack. The mobilization of the human fleet was the largest military operation since the evacuation 15 years earlier. Every ship, every soldier, every resource was directed toward one purpose. Captain Derek Hayes oversaw the logistics from Mars, while Nicole Grant prepared her destroyer Phoenix for immediate deployment. Lieutenant Brandon Cole volunteered for the first strike group, along with thousands of other young officers who had grown up dreaming of proving humanity's worth. Engineer Peter Walsh and Dr. Lisa Chen worked around the clock to equip the fleet with the latest technology. The quantum slip drives would give them the speed they needed to reach council space quickly. The graviton shields would keep them alive when they got there. The plasma lances would give them the firepower to hurt an enemy that had rolled over everything the council could throw at them. 300 warships prepared for departure. It was a fraction of the size of the old Galactic Defense Force, but every vessel represented the absolute cutting edge of human innovation. They were smaller than council dreadnoughts, but faster, tougher, and meaner. They had been built in isolation by a species that had something to prove. Jake Morrison stood on the Bridge of Unity and looked out at the assembled fleet. These were humanity's finest, men and women who had volunteered to risk everything to save people who had rejected them. He felt pride and fear in equal measure, pride in what humans could be at their best, fear that it might not be enough. Admiral Claire Bennett appeared beside him. She had been quiet since the council meeting, and Jake knew why. Claire had been the one who warned the council that they would regret their decision. She had promised that darkness would come. Now it had, and part of her felt vindicated even as she hated herself for feeling that way. Jake told her it was okay to be angry. What the council did was wrong, but anger couldn't be the thing that drove them now. If they went into this fight for revenge, they would lose. They had to fight for something better, something that mattered more than past grudges. Claire nodded slowly. She said she had been fighting for humanity her whole life, ever since she was a young officer during the first contact with the council. She had seen humans reach for the stars and get slapped down. She had seen the fear in alien eyes when they looked at humans and saw something they didn't understand. She had been there when they decided fear was more important than friendship. But now humans had a chance to show the galaxy what they really were. Not the aggressive, dangerous species the council feared. Not the wounded, bitter outcasts they had become. But something better than either of those. They could be the ones who came back when everyone else would have stayed away. the ones who saved people who didn't deserve saving because it was right. The fleet prepared to jump. Engineers ran final checks on the quantum drives. Weapons crews loaded ammunition. Medical bays stocked supplies for casualties they knew were coming. In the crew quarters, soldiers wrote letters home that would only be sent if they didn't come back. They knew the odds. They knew what they were flying into. They went anyway. President Linda Foster broadcast a message to the fleet and to everyone on Earth, Mars, Luna, and all the human stations scattered through Sol space. She said humanity was going to war not for territory or resources or revenge. They were going because people were dying and humans had the power to stop it. She said history would remember this moment as the day humanity proved they deserved their place among the stars, not because they were strong or smart or advanced, but because when the galaxy needed heroes, humans answered the call. The quantum drives engaged. Space bent around 300 human warships. In an instant, they vanished from Sol space and reappeared at the edge of Council territory. The human fleet had returned, and this time they were bringing fire. The human fleet materialized at the edge of Council space, and every sensor on every Scourge ship suddenly registered something new. 300 vessels had appeared from nowhere, moving in perfect formation, broadcasting on all frequencies a simple message in every Council language. Humanity had returned, and they were not asking for permission. Captain Nicole Grant stood on the bridge of the destroyer Phoenix as part of the Vanguard force. She was 28 years old and in command of a ship worth more than some planets. Her crew was young and angry and ready to prove themselves. They had grown up as outcasts, and now they were going to show the galaxy what humans could do when pushed. The first test came immediately. The colony world of Tarsus 4 was half consumed when the human fleet arrived. Scourge vessels swarmed over the planet like insects, their organic hulls pulsing as they stripped away atmosphere and resources. The Galactic Defense Force remnants were in full retreat, their elegant ships shattered and burning. They had called for evacuation ships that would never arrive in time. 3 million people were about to die. Nicole didn't wait for orders. She pointed Phoenix directly at the largest Scourge vessel and gave the command to engage. The quantum drive kicked in, and her ship vanished from where it was and reappeared directly behind the enemy. The Scourge had never seen anything move like that. They started to turn their weapons, but they were too slow. Phoenix opened fire with plasma lances that punched through the Scourge hull like paper. The alien vessel shuddered and died, its organic systems unable to cope with wounds that catastrophic. The rest of the Vanguard followed Nicole's lead. Human ships jumped in and out of normal space, appearing behind enemy vessels, firing, and disappearing before the Scourge could react. It was a fighting style no one in the galaxy had ever seen because no one else had quantum drives. The Scourge, used to easy victories against slow-moving Council ships, suddenly faced an enemy that was faster and hit harder than anything they had encountered. Lieutenant Brandon Cole worked the weapons station on Unity as they engaged a Scourge dreadnought. The massive vessel was 10 times the size of the human flagship, but that didn't matter. Brandon locked on target and fired. The plasma lances struck the enemy shields and burned through them. The Scourge dreadnought tried to return fire, but Unity was already moving, quantum jumping to a new position. Brandon fired again, and again. Within minutes, the enemy ship was crippled and drifting. The battle for Tarsus 4 lasted 6 hours. The human fleet destroyed 47 Scourge vessels and drove off the rest. Evacuation ships reached the planet and started pulling survivors off the surface. Council civilians, mostly Corellians and Thragans, stared in shock as human soldiers directed them to safety. These were the same humans who had been banished, the same humans who had every reason to let them die. Yet here they were, fighting and bleeding to save people who had rejected them. Admiral Jake Morrison coordinated the fleet from Unity's bridge. He watched the tactical displays as human ships engaged across multiple star systems simultaneously. The reports coming in were mixed. They were winning battles, but the war was far from over. The Scourge numbered in the thousands and kept coming. For every ship the humans destroyed, 2 more appeared. At a place called the Proxima Defense Line, the real test came. The Scourge threw everything they had at the humans, trying to overwhelm them with sheer numbers. Commander Ethan Brooks commanded the cruiser Valiant as part of the defensive screen. His job was to hold the line while civilian transports evacuated a planet behind them. The Scourge came in waves, hundreds of ships all converging on the same point. Ethan's crew fought like demons, their weapons firing non-stop until the barrels glowed red. But there were too many. The shields on Valiant started failing. Ethan looked at the tactical display and saw that the evacuation ships were still loading civilians. They needed 10 more minutes. He didn't have 10 minutes. The Scourge were closing in for the kill. Ethan made a decision. He ordered his crew to abandon ship, then locked the quantum drive into overload. Valiant accelerated directly into the Scourge formation and detonated in a massive explosion that vaporized everything within 1,000 miles. The blast created enough time for the evacuation to complete. 300,000 civilians survived because one human captain chose to die. The war spread across dozens of systems. Human ships were everywhere, jumping in to support beleaguered Council forces evacuating civilians, destroying Scourge vessels. The Council had never seen anything like it. For 15 years they had believed themselves superior to humanity. Now they watched as human ships performed maneuvers they thought impossible, used weapons they couldn't explain, and demonstrated a level of tactical brilliance that made Council admirals look like children. On the ground, the fighting was just as brutal. Colonel Ryan Foster led the 1st Marine Division in the defense of New Zentara, the Zentari homeworld. The crystalline beings were pacifists by nature and had no ground forces of their own. The Scourge landed thousands of warriors, bioengineered killing machines that tore through everything in their path. Ryan's Marines met them in the streets and showed them what human soldiers could do. The fighting was building to building, room to room. The Scourge were strong and fast and felt no fear. But humans had been fighting wars for thousands of years. They knew every dirty trick, every tactical advantage, every way to kill an enemy that should be stronger than you. Ryan's troops used the urban environment against the Scourge, creating ambushes, collapsing buildings on them, turning their own strength into a weakness. Dr. Lisa Chen was aboard Unity, analyzing data from captured Scourge technology. She worked with a team of scientists who were trying to understand how the hive mind functioned. The breakthrough came when they captured an intact Scourge warrior. Lisa studied the neural patterns and discovered something crucial. The hive mind wasn't truly distributed. There was a central hub, a command ship that coordinated everything. Destroy it, and the entire Scourge fleet would lose coordination. She brought her findings to Jake Morrison immediately. Jake called a meeting of his senior staff and laid out the situation. The Scourge command ship was deep in enemy-controlled space, surrounded by thousands of defensive vessels. Getting to it would require punching through a fleet that outnumbered them badly. It was a suicide mission. Jake asked for volunteers. Every single captain raised their hand. The operation was called Final Dawn. The plan was simple in concept and nearly impossible in execution. The entire human fleet would jump directly into the heart of Scourge space. They would fight their way to the command ship and destroy it before they were overwhelmed. The survival rate was estimated at less than 10%. They were going anyway. Engineer Peter Walsh worked with his team to modify Unity's shields. They pushed the graviton generators past their design specifications, creating a defensive field that could withstand incredible punishment, but only for a limited time. Pilot Susan Martinez plotted a course through the Scourge fleet that relied on split-second timing and perfect coordination. Medical Officer Greg Phillips prepared the infirmary and quietly wrote letters to his family that he hoped would never be delivered. Admiral Claire Bennett walked through the ship talking to the crew. She found young ensigns barely out of training, veteran sergeants who had served for decades, engineers and doctors and gunners and pilots. All of them knew what they were flying into. All of them were ready. Claire asked one young woman why she volunteered. The ensign said her parents had been evacuated from New Terra when she was a baby. The Council had taken her childhood home. Now she had a chance to make sure no one else lost theirs. The fleet jumped into the heart of darkness. Space around them filled with Scourge vessels. Thousands of enemy ships all converging on 300 human vessels that had dared to enter their territory. The battle began immediately. Phoenix took fire from 6 directions at once. Nicole Grant ordered evasive maneuvers, and her pilot threw the ship into a series of quantum jumps, that would have torn apart a council vessel. The Scourge couldn't track them. Phoenix fired back, plasma lances cutting through enemy hulls. Unity led the charge toward the command ship. Brandon Cole fired the weapons in a continuous barrage. The plasma lances overheated, but the engineers kept them running through sheer force of will. Scourge vessels exploded around them. But for every one they destroyed, 2 more took its place. The human fleet was bleeding. Ships reported critical damage, failing shields, casualties mounting. They pushed forward anyway. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge and watched his fleet die. He saw Phoenix take a direct hit that sheared off a third of the ship. Nicole Grant kept fighting with what she had left. He saw the destroyer Courage ram a Scourge dreadnought when her weapons failed. He saw escape pods launching from crippled ships and hoped rescue would come for them. He knew it probably wouldn't, but they were almost there. The command ship loomed ahead, massive and pulsing with the energy of billions of connected minds. Unity accelerated toward it, every weapon firing, shields flickering as they absorbed hit after hit. They were going to make it. They had to make it. The fate of the galaxy depended on the next few minutes. The battle for the Scourge command ship raged for 16 hours, and every minute felt like a lifetime. Unity led what remained of the human fleet in a desperate charge through a wall of enemy vessels that seemed endless. Captain Nicole Grant fought from a bridge that was half destroyed, her ship Phoenix barely holding together, but she kept firing. Lieutenant Brandon Cole worked his weapons station even as fires burned around him, and the air grew thin. All across the fleet, humans pushed past exhaustion and fear and pain because giving up meant the galaxy died. Admiral Jake Morrison stood at the center of the storm, directing ships that were falling apart around him. He watched the tactical display as another destroyer exploded, taking 200 souls with it. He watched as the cruiser Defiant made a final charge that bought them precious seconds. He watched humans die and wanted to scream but couldn't afford to. They were almost there. The command ship filled their view screens, a massive organic structure that pulsed with the light of the hive mind controlling billions of Scourge across the galaxy. Commander Helen Price had identified the exact location of the hive node through analysis of the energy patterns. It was deep inside the command ship, protected by layers of armor and shields that would take hours to penetrate with conventional weapons. Hours they didn't have. The Scourge were adapting to human tactics, learning how the quantum drives worked, adjusting their formations to counter the hit-and-run attacks. The window was closing fast. Jake made the hardest decision of his career. He ordered Unity to ram the command ship. There was a moment of stunned silence on the bridge. Engineer Peter Walsh protested that the graviton shields weren't designed for that kind of impact. Pilot Susan Martinez said the quantum drive would probably explode from the stress. Medical officer Greg Phillips just started strapping down equipment because he knew Jake wasn't going to change his mind. Unity accelerated to full speed with the quantum drive, pushing reality itself to the breaking point. The Scourge command ship fired every weapon it had at the incoming human flagship. The graviton shields flared and sparked as they deflected unimaginable amounts of energy. The hull temperature soared. Pieces of armor plating tore away. The ship screamed as it was pushed beyond every design specification, but it held together just long enough. Unity punched through the Scourge shields like they weren't there. The graviton field created a pocket of bent space around the ship that physics couldn't quite cope with. They hit the outer hull of the command ship and kept going, tearing through organic armor that was supposed to be impenetrable. The impact threw everyone on the bridge to the floor. Alarms blared. Systems failed, but they were inside. Captain Derek Hayes led the boarding team because Jake needed to stay on the bridge. Derek had volunteered immediately when the plan was announced. He took 50 Marines, the best of the best, all of them knowing this was a one-way trip. They cut through the hull and entered the Scourge vessel. The corridors were dark and organic, pulsing like they were inside a living thing, which they were. The Scourge warriors came at them immediately, bioengineered killing machines that were faster and stronger than humans. But Derek's Marines had trained for 15 years with one purpose: to be the best soldiers the galaxy had ever seen. They used overlapping fields of fire, grenades that filled corridors with shrapnel, and a level of tactical coordination that came from endless drilling. The Scourge were strong, but humans were smarter and meaner and refused to die easily. Peter Walsh carried the quantum charge. It was a compact device, but it would generate an explosion big enough to vaporize everything within miles. He just had to get it to the hive node. The team fought through corridor after corridor, leaving bodies behind. A Marine named Johnson died covering their retreat. A sergeant named Lee sacrificed herself to take out a Scourge ambush. They kept moving forward because stopping meant everyone died for nothing. The hive node chamber was massive, a vast space filled with pulsing organic technology that was beyond human understanding. The node itself hung in the center, a structure that looked like a brain the size of a building. Peter could feel the intelligence radiating from it, billions of minds all connected through this single point. He set the charge and armed it. 30 seconds until detonation. Derek ordered everyone to run. They sprinted back through the corridors they had fought through, the Marines firing behind them to keep the Scourge at bay. But there were too many. The enemy had realized what was happening and thrown everything at stopping them. Derek saw his team getting cut down one by one. 20 seconds left. They reached a junction where the corridor split 3 ways. Derek made a decision. He ordered his remaining Marines to take the left path back to Unity. He would take the right path and draw the Scourge away. Before anyone could argue, he started running and firing, screaming insults to get the enemy's attention. It worked. The Scourge warriors chased after him. 15 seconds. Derek ran alone through alien corridors, his weapon nearly empty, his armor cracked and leaking air. He could hear the Scourge behind him getting closer. 10 seconds. He thought about Claire Bennett, who had always believed in him. He thought about humanity and the chance they had been given to prove themselves. 5 seconds. He stopped running and turned to face the swarm. He smiled and said something that only he could hear. "Tell them we did it. Tell them humans don't abandon people." The quantum charge detonated. The explosion ripped through the Scourge command ship, consuming the hive node and everything around it. The massive vessel broke apart, its structure failing as the central intelligence that held it together ceased to exist. The blast wave expanded outward in a sphere of destructive energy that lit up space for millions of miles. Aboard Unity, they felt the shock wave hit. Alarms went silent. Systems came back online. Jake Morrison pulled himself up and looked at the tactical display. All across the battlefield, Scourge ships were going dark. The hive mind had collapsed. Without central coordination, the individual vessels didn't know what to do. Some fired randomly, some just drifted. Most turned and fled back into dark space, their unified purpose shattered. The battle was over. Humanity had won. The cost was staggering. 37 ships lost, 8,000 dead including Derek Hayes and 50 of the finest soldiers the fleet had. Nicole Grant's Phoenix was crippled beyond repair. Unity was barely functional, held together by Peter Walsh's emergency patches and prayers. But they had done the impossible. They had saved the galaxy. The journey back to Council space took days. Unity limped along, trailing debris and atmosphere. Other ships in the fleet were in similar shape. They made temporary repairs and kept moving because stopping meant dying in the void. Rescue ships from Council worlds started appearing, offering assistance. The humans accepted it quietly. No celebration, no victory speeches. They were too tired and had lost too many friends. The Galactic Council reconvened on Zentara Prime in the same chamber where they had banished humanity 15 years earlier. The building was damaged from the Scourge attack but still standing. Council members from the surviving species gathered, their numbers greatly reduced. The war had killed billions and destroyed dozens of worlds. The galaxy would take generations to recover. Fleet Admiral Jake Morrison entered the chamber walking beside Admiral Claire Bennett, who was in a wheelchair, injured during the final battle. Captain Nicole Grant stood with them, her uniform burned and torn but her head held high. They stood before the council just as they had 15 years before, but everything was different now. Ambassador Velthor approached slowly. The massive crystalline being was cracked and damaged, pieces of his structure missing from the fighting. He looked at the three humans and bowed deeply. It was a gesture the Zentari reserved for only the most honored. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. "We were wrong," he said. "We feared your strength and mistook your passion for aggression. We cast you out when we should have embraced you. We owe you a debt that can never be repaid." Jake waited for the anger to come, the vindication, the satisfaction of being proven right. It didn't come. He just felt tired. He told Velthor that humanity didn't come back for gratitude or apologies. They came back because people were dying and humans had the power to stop it. They came back because when you strip away all the politics and history and grudges, everyone in the galaxy was just trying to survive. That was enough. President Linda Foster appeared via hologram from Earth. She addressed the council and said that humanity had learned something during their 15 years of isolation. Being cast out had hurt, but it had also freed them to become something better. They had stopped worrying about what others thought and started focusing on who they wanted to be. The answer was simple. They wanted to be the kind of people who helped when others needed it. Even when those others didn't deserve it, the council voted unanimously to reinstate humanity and offered them a permanent seat in the Leadership Council. They proposed the Treaty of Unity, a new galactic charter based on principles of freedom and mutual defense that humanity had championed. The old order was gone, destroyed by the Scourge. Something new would take its place, built on the lessons learned from the war. Senator Paul Hendricks watched the broadcast from Mars and felt conflicted. He had been right that reconciliate,